Investment instead of austerity, a solution for the economic crisis? In the interview, Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Laureate for Economics.
Mr. Stiglitz, you are here with 16 other Nobel Prize winners and over 300 young economists here in Lindau at the meeting at very turbulent times for the world economy. Why is this meeting important for you?
Well, I think this meeting is about economics and the economics profession. It's an opportunity to try to influence young people who will be those who will develop economics in coming years. The economics profession did not play a good role in the crisis. That is to say, the standard models, the models that were used by central banks, by macroeconomists around the world, didn't forecast, didn't anticipate, didn't predict. So overall, the standard models that most economists relied upon, including some of those advocated by some of the people here, were in some ways responsible for the crisis. And that's why it's so important to influence the younger people, that they recognize that the economics profession, like the bankers, has some culpability for what has happened.
Now, around the world, stock markets have tumbled, with some seeing their biggest one-day drop since 2008. Bank shares were hit especially hard. Can market crashes stoke a negative spiral from your point of view?
Yes, but what is really being reflected here is we didn't fix the banking system. One of the ways we didn't fix it is we didn't create transparency. No one really knows about a lot of the non-transparent over-the-counter derivatives. So no one really knows the financial position of a lot of the banks. We maintain the problem of too big to fail banks. We allow the banks to continue in their excessive risk-taking. So the bottom line is we haven't fixed the underlying problem that caused the crisis in 2008.
So what is the difference between the crisis now and the crisis after the Lehman crash? Or is there no difference?
Well, there is a difference. On the negative side, the difference is that the governments do not have the resources and the political support to do the kind of interventions they did 3 years ago. There would be no support for the kind of bailout that we did for AIG, Goldman Sachs, the other banks in 2008. So that means the instrument, and our resources are diminished because of the high concern about deficits and debt. So that means the ability of government or willingness of government to intervene is markedly lower.
But what kind of role should politicians play at the moment, from your point of view?
Well, the answer depends on what kinds of commitments the leaders in Europe, and particularly Germany, are willing to make. Now, I was very optimistic in the meeting at the end of July, where they came together and they said, we are going to make sure that the euro will survive. They provided assistance to Greece and other countries. They created a framework. They recognized that if Greece is to survive, there has to be growth. The problem was that they didn't put enough money right away behind that growth strategy. It has to be ratified by all the countries in the euro. It's a slow process. And meanwhile, the problems continue. The problem of contagion spread to Spain and Italy. And what seemed to be a good solution at the end of July looks at the current vantage point perhaps not big enough. And the question is, if they weren't willing to come forward quickly to fulfill their commitments at the end of July, will they now be willing to come forward with mechanisms to provide even more commitments that seem to be necessary at this point?
But what kind of mechanisms could this be?
Oh, there are a number of different mechanisms. The European bond is one mechanism. Increased support for the various kinds of ESFS, various kinds of funds that have been created.
Which means more money and more money and more money?
Yeah, or expanding the role of the European Central Bank to buy bonds of the countries that are being attacked.
Do you
by
think
financial markets.
it's a good way the European Central Bank is handling the crisis at the moment?
Well, it's the only way.
Okay.
In the absence of the more explicit support from the governments. I would prefer more explicit support, but that seems politically difficult. And in the absence of that, I think what the ECB is doing is the only way if the euro is to survive. Now, Europe can make a decision. They don't want the euro to survive. But I think Europe has and will benefit from the euro if they can make it work.
So what kind of leadership is necessary, for example, from Germany, political leadership?
I think the political leadership is to try to explain to the German people that they have very little choice. It's very difficult to unscramble a scrambled egg. It's very costly for Europe to break up. It's very costly to Germany. Either way, where you are, you have a little choice. And so your choice is to spend a lot of money undoing the mess that will be created if the euro falls apart, or to provide a limited amount of money to make sure that the euro will survive. It's very difficult to judge which of these is more expensive, but in the end, if you put the money in the investment in the euro, at least you have something to show for it. In the other case, it's just money down the drain.
But what would happen to the world economy if the euro wouldn't survive?
In the long run, the world will adjust to the end of the euro, but it will be not an easy transition. And particularly right now, when the global economy is weak, the American economy is weak, it's a very, very risky time to try this experiment of undoing the euro. It's not something I would advise.
So how much money could it cost for Germany to save the euro?
That's very hard to put a price tag on. Part of the reason why it's very costly, very difficult to put a number, is if somehow the countries of Europe could get together, devise a growth strategy, commit themselves to grow faster, then the difficulties of the problems of Greece and Portugal and Ireland would be much lower. If these countries were growing, then their revenues would go up and the amount of assistance that they would need would go down. If Germany can get itself to grow and make a commitment to the euro, then I think the amount of real assistance that will be needed in the end will be relatively low.
What is your outlook for the world economy for this year?
Well, for the world economy, things are actually not that bad. If you look at the average growth numbers for the world, they're not bad. And that's keeping up commodity prices. That's actually having a problem, though, for the U.S. and Europe. Because while we don't export that much to these emerging markets, we export some. These countries are buying a lot of commodities. Their demand for commodities is keeping commodity prices much higher than they would normally be in an economic slowdown in the north. And so we continue to have to pay high commodity prices even though we have a weak economy.
All in all, things are not looking too bleak. That's what I get from your statement. Thank you very much, Mr. Stiglitz. Thank you for being with us.